Welcome to the Winging It Travel Podcast, a show dedicated to travel. Tune in each Monday to hear captivating stories from some of the world's most travelled people, die-hard backpackers, travel professionals, and inspiring explorers. Let's get stuck in. Hello and welcome to this week's solo episode. This is a reflection on the previous 250 episodes as I reached that milestone a few weeks back. It's going to be divided into two. The first half, I've got a number generator from 1 to 150, which represents the guest episodes. And whatever that falls on, I'll give you a 20 to 30 second reason why you should listen to that episode. That's going to be on the fly, so let's see how that one goes. And then the second half is a set of things I'm going to tell you about what I've learned, some stats, and what's coming up in the future for the Winging It Travel Podcast. Right, let's crack on with it. So I have my generator ready on Google. I'm going to press the generate button. How exciting is this? I might even put a little jingle in there for you. I've now pressed the button. 134. Got my list here. Bear with me, there's a few. Emily Wilson. And the reason you should listen to this episode is because she travels with her dogs. So if you have animals and you're a bit unsure about where to travel, or if it's even possible, then this episode is great because it's the only episode to discuss pets. So it's quite a unique episode in 150. So we talk about all the reasons why you should travel with pets, some of the best countries to travel to with pets, some of the areas to avoid, the admin, the cost of doing that as well, and all the fun stuff about dogs. How can you not love traveling dogs? There you go. There's the first one. I've just hit the button again. And we're on to 46 is Lee Huffman from the We Travel There podcast. If you want another great travel podcast recommendation, he does a 30 to 40 minute episode each week about one particular place, and a guest from that place comes on and talks about it. I've been on his podcast. I talked about Norwich, where I'm from. And he is great for the sort of points aspect of travel. So if you're looking to maybe write off some of your trips of your business, or you're looking to utilise the point system, especially in US, Canada, and arguably the UK, then he has some great tips on that. He also talks about what he does in terms of blogging, because he left the finance industry. I think he had quite a good job there and went to go on his own. So he does a blog and a travel podcast. The blog is called Bald Thoughts, as in bald head. And yeah, he talks about his podcast, what he's learned from his various cities on his podcast episodes, and also about running a podcast. And we discuss a bit of US and international travel, but mostly the points thing is very interesting. He talks about that, and his blog is brilliant if you're interested in that. Right, let's go for the next generate. Here we go. Number 3 is 107. Romana. She's an interesting person. She's written 10 books, and she's a skydive instructor and also a laughing yoga instructor, and lives in a camper van. So it's a combination of travels, that nomadic lifestyle, that like entrepreneur mindset. And so we talk about how she first got into solo traveling in Italy, leaving as a young woman to go solo travel. And then she was motorcycling around Europe and decided one day she wants to become a skydiving instructor. That's pretty cool. I love skydiving. And also how to prioritize laughing, because if you don't laugh in life, what's the point? So that's an interesting episode. Lots of laughing in that one as well. Okay, next one up. 58. That is the Whiskey 7 Project, who unfortunately do not podcast anymore. These guys are interesting. I actually can't say too much about them, which adds to the intrigue, but they come on to talk about their experiences in Crater Lake and hiking in America, and also have some history in the military. So they talk about maybe going in the jungle there. They're very mysterious people, those two, and they don't use real names on the podcast, so it's one of those. But great for traveling USA, great for a laugh. I love their travel philosophy about trying to get stuck into local culture, and they do have a real passion for travel, but very funny. A couple of American guys just taking a piss out of each other. Right, next generator. 22 is going to be Connor Kelly, one of the most popular episodes in the early first half of the podcast. Connor lives in Vietnam, and this episode is all about living in Vietnam. So if you're interested in maybe getting a work permit or teaching English in Vietnam, Connor is the guy to go to. He used to do a podcast called Comeback Podcast. He's rebranded since then. But this is about self-help, travel, sports, and getting settled in to the lifestyle in Vietnam. I think he lives in Hanoi now. But yeah, he teaches English. He actually left. He got an Australian work permit, went traveling around Asia, Southeast Asia, and decided to go back to Vietnam and suspend his Australian work permit. So all about Vietnam. It's an absolute cracker. Right, next generator. 38 is going to be Rachel Fox, who's been on about 100 times. Episode 38 for Rachel Fox is Brazil, Venice, Miami, and Chile, and Greece and Iceland. Basically, she comes on to talk about her whole travels. And I would highly recommend checking out all of her episodes because she comes on to talk about ridiculous stories in South America and Central America. And she's one of the funniest people I know. And her partner, Aaron, they're an interesting couple, the way they travel. Aaron can speak fluent Spanish, probably a bit more down to earth and a bit more laid back. Rachel is a goer, wants to go to speak to people, get stuck in. Just a nice couple to assess when they travel. So lots of funny stories, lots of tips about traveling in South and Central America, and a classic backpacking episode. Okay, 127, Renee Bruns. Renee, this is a great episode. I actually put this as one of the 2 recommendations of my podcast. I think if you go onto Spotify and see what 2 I recommend, this is one of them. She's travelled to an unbelievable amount of countries, probably more now because I do follow her, but at the time, 118 countries and all 50 states. So this is an episode about what it's like to travel as a wheelchair user, the accessibility issues or good things about certain countries. I think she mentioned some airlines that are good and not so good. I kind of got stuck into about how she become wheelchair bound, so it's quite an interesting story. But she's super inspirational, doesn't stop her from traveling the world, but she's very honest about the difficulties of travel. Yeah, she talks about growing up with her disability, and I think she's happy to call it that as well. So a mix of wanderlust, her disability, the challenges and the good things about being disabled going into the world of travel. So an interesting and inspirational episode, that one. Renee Bruns. Okay, next one, 61, is Eric Spitz, who used to host the Juxtaposed Journeys podcast, which doesn't actually exist anymore. It's still out there, but it's not current. But Eric talks about running a marathon in every state in USA. So he's one of those people who runs a lot. I think he's travelled to nearly every state now, and he's ran a marathon in 16 of those. And we sort of delve into his first experiences abroad in Australia. And I think what I like about this episode is I get a good idea what it's like from an American concept about travelling abroad and even travel itself, because I'm from the UK. I feel like a lot of people in the UK travel abroad quite easily because Europe is literally half an hour away on the flight and very cheap. So we talk about Eric's OCD, about his running, about how he helps himself by travelling. Just a super cool episode, that one. Right, let's go. Next one. 124. John McKenzie. John, who I met at TravelCon this year. Great to meet him in person. Got a photo. Didn't get to hang out much with him, unfortunately. But this is a great episode because we got to talk about road tripping Armenia. So John is an avid traveller. I wanted to hear about road tripping in that country. It's on my list. He also talks about the Falkland Islands. That's quite an interesting place as well. And I was intrigued by his French Polynesia trip. It's a bit of a dream of mine to go to Bora Bora and stuff like that. So just a classic travelling episode. That one, lots of tips, a few countries. Loved it. And the next one is 92. Travelling with Brian and Will from the Travel Agents podcast and Kima Travel. These guys are a couple of travel agents, as mentioned in the episode. And they come on to talk about what it's like to work in a travel agency and what they can offer you in terms of what they give in terms of tours. So Brian is the 3rd or 4th generation down to take over the business. They're based in Ohio, in Akron. Some funny stories with people who are booking trips. And also they talk about their podcast. I'm not sure if they run the podcast that much anymore. I do remember from this podcast a ridiculous story about an American traveller going to Italy and wanting them to provide them with an Italian-American guide. So someone who grew up in the US but can speak Italian because they couldn't understand the native Italians. I don't think Brian was too impressed with that. So those sort of stories, quite funny. Great couple of guys. 11. God, going to the early days. Number 11 is Mike Butlin. This is a classic episode and of course one of my favourites because me and Mike talk about our 6-month trip in 2013 in Asia, and this is a part 2 of that in Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore and Bali. Part 1 will be, I'd imagine, Thailand and Cambodia, and I think we just reveal all the stories going from that trip. Very funny. We're going to Asia for the first time, a definite culture shock for me, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Mike pushed me to go to Asia because I only had interest in going to Australia, New Zealand and Fiji. Lots of wanderlust, lots of funny travel stories, lots of people that we've met, recording our stories, recording the situations, the anecdotes, the scams, everything you can imagine. Just a bunch of great stories. And maybe one more to finish. Let's do 145 is Scott Gurian. Oh, what a guy. This is the Mongol Rally. So if you're interested in an unreal story about travelling from London to Mongolia in a beefed up car, which is quite popular in the UK. It's a popular thing amongst travellers in the UK, and everyone does sort of know this trip and has heard of it. But Scott done it. So we talk about his journey there and how it changed him. He's a journalist. He's one of those journalists who get out there and gets a story. So he's travelling the world, trying to find a story. I even include a clip from his podcast when he got the ayahuasca treatment in Peru. That was an experience. So I put in a few audio clips and we talk about Chernobyl, Peru, ayahuasca, and his radio career, journalist career, his podcast. He's an adventure traveller. Just a great guy. Really enjoyed speaking to Scott. Okay, this is the last one. Going to wrap up here. One more generate. That's number 49. Carissa and Lynn, my friends in Vancouver, who talk about what it's like to move to Canada from a country that does not speak the same language and it's a completely different culture. So Carissa is from the Philippines, Lynn is from Vietnam. So there's a lot of chat about how they integrated into society here, and it's great if you're looking to move to a different country that's quite unique or out there, and it gives some great tips and tricks about what to expect, how to adapt, how to find jobs, how to get settled, and also go through the residency and passport admin as well if you're looking to stay. And of course we add some travel in there, but that's the one if you're looking to move to a different country. I think it's a great one to end on. Hey, yeah, just a quick one. I just want to say there are many ways to support this podcast. You can buy me a coffee and help support the podcast with $5, or you can go to my merch store with the affiliate link with TeePublic, where there's plenty of merch available to buy, such as t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies, and also some children's clothing. Thirdly, which is free, you can also rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or Good Pods. Also, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Simply just search for Winging It Travel Podcast and you'll find me displaying all my social media content for travelling, podcast and other stuff. Thank you. So I'm going to just wrap up with some review comments from the last 250 episodes. So some stats as well. We've got 250 hours of free content to the average episode across the guest episodes and the solo episodes. It's about 61 minutes. So that's your average. I've had quite a few repeat guests like Rachel Fox. So I've got 70 male guests and 62 female guests. So I'm almost at 50-50. Got a bit of work to do on that. I actually stopped counting countries who listened because it got to about 150. So that's not bad, I suppose. I don't know my figures for my podcast downloads. It's very hard to know what's right and what's true out there. Listen Notes puts it in the top 3% of podcasts in the world. And that does correlate maybe to the figures I get on Raphonic, who put me around 3,000 plays, downloads a month. So that's roughly what I'm at, I think. Sounds decent. I think it's okay in the grand scheme of things. It's definitely enough to get a move on with and utilise. But I'm looking to obviously increase the podcast and get more as we go on and bring people along for the journey. The top 10 countries who listen in terms of downloads or plays in order is USA, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, Ireland, India, France, and Sweden. 3 biggest lessons learned. So I've learned that producing a weekly podcast for a long format episode, like I used to do last year and the year before, so every week a 1 to 2 hour episode with a guest, is really tough in terms of time because I'm on my own. So I control every aspect of the podcast. I don't outsource because I don't make any money. So that's why I moved to bi-weekly guest episodes this year, to give myself more time to make it better. To add to that, traveling and podcasting every week at the same time is very, very hard and almost impossible to do. I managed to do it last year and get every episode out on time, roughly. So the content is great, but the standard of the podcasting is not great. So I tried it in 2023, learned a lot of lessons about that. So amazing content, but stressful with trying to get every episode out in terms of where I was at that time, but also trying to edit the guest episodes and record guest episodes on the road. Tough going. So going to be a little bit different in the future, but I'll come to that in a second. Second lesson, I don't want to be too generic going into the next 250 episodes. I want to niche down. So drill down on a particular place or country. Could be the type of travel, could be hostels, could be about using points, whatever it is. I don't want to be too generic. Lesson number 3 is more common themes that I've realised in the podcast. And from the guests, I've realised that there are many ways to travel and it's not a competition. So whether you're looking to backpack, go on vacation, book a tour, Hitchhike, road trip, live on a sailboat, be a digital nomad, slow travel, fast travel, whatever it is. There's no right way of doing it. You just have to travel the way you see fit and the way it suits you. I think we kind of see online this concept of traveling being a certain way. I think in the early days I was a bit competitive and I was thinking there's only one way to travel, and that's backpacking and budget, but I don't think that anymore. It all depends what you're looking for. Okay, stages of the podcast. If you're new to this episode or you've only listened to a few episodes, here are the stages of the podcast if you want to know what each basically year is covering. So February to December 2021, when I first started, kind of get my feet in the door with podcasting, struggling for guests. A lot of my mates came on for my travels, which are great. Quite raw episodes. I didn't edit episodes in those days. I didn't have a laptop. The audio quality is not the best, and I almost gave up in July because no one was listening. 2022, the podcast started to pick up. I started to edit episodes because I wanted the quality to be better. Guests started to approach me, so I was able to get some guests on that I thought were cool in terms of being approached by, but also send out some cold emails and messages to get guests I want to come on. So there's a mix of those. Weekly long format episodes with guests, so I really started to go into the guest episodes, and a real mix of content and the jump in popularity, which kept me going. That's great. 2023 was my year of traveling, so a lot of solo episodes or episodes on location on the road as I traveled the world. So less guest episodes that year as I tried to navigate travels and doing the podcast. I even tried to navigate recording episodes whilst traveling, which is impossible. And there are some live episodes in terms of Venice, Paris, and Ljubljana, where I managed to get someone on the podcast in person and record that. I did learn some lessons from that, which I'll take forward with me going into the future. So audio not the best, but amazing content, great tips if you're looking to go traveling. And I pretty much listed out everything that we did on the travels in 2023 in every country and every place. So it's great to look back on for my travels as well. So quite a cool year. 2024, I've upgraded my microphone and equipment. It's the best in terms of quality and the sounding and the production. Another big jump in listeners. I do guests every 2 weeks now to give space for you to listen to the guests because they are 1 hour to 2 hours long. Solo episodes in between are normally stuff like this, or me being a guest on another episode, or any particular topic that comes up in mind. I do try to recall some stories to kind of keep that storytelling going as well. A lot of people are approaching me to be on the podcast, so I've had to turn some people down and really pick and choose my guests, as it is now every 2 weeks. And I want to be more selective, offering the best type of podcast episodes for you in terms of guests. What are the best subjects to go into? What niche can we drill down into? So I'm trying to select based on what I think you might find quite cool and entertaining, and not too samey. And I kind of got my house in order as well, got my website sorted. I'm using SEO for titles and descriptions to try and get the podcast out there on Google. Started my YouTube channel and blogging every week. And I'm really happy with the guests I've had on this year and what's coming up this year. So that kind of gets on to what's coming up. So more the same, more guests. And there's a couple of special episodes coming up. I have my first sponsored episode from Safety Wing on episode 151. So that's basically the next episode after this, which is paid, which is great, about time. In November, I'm off to Central America for a month. So I'll be looking to record episodes on the go again, but more strategically and with better equipment. So I'm going to plan it a bit better, but also looking to give you that real raw traveling on the go, every story, every place. And it's El Salvador, Guatemala and Mexico overland for a month. That's going to be pretty cool. And there's more potential for collaborations and other sponsored episodes. And I have a full quota of guests going into 2025 already. Amazing. And finally, just what's come up long term. We've done 250, so what's happening for the next 250? I'm pretty comfortable with identifying myself as a traveller. I think that is going to happen pretty much for the rest of my life. So that means two things. That's going to happen. But I also love meeting and talking to people. So that means this podcast is going to carry on for the foreseeable. I get excited about the potential guests, about the places I travel to, the collaborations. So I can't see this podcast ending anytime soon. I'm really motivated to keep it going. And I love kind of putting content out there for people to learn about travel. So I'm pretty excited about future guests, location trips, collaborations. I'd also like to monetize this and my YouTube to make it a full-time thing in the future so I can concentrate fully on it. But that takes time. And at the top of my mind right now is 250 episodes is a heck of an achievement from the last 3.5 years. It won't be as quick because I used to do 2 episodes a week. And apart from the on location series, which like Central America might be 2 a week. I can't see it being that quick, but that's not a problem. It's about quality, not quantity. So as I mentioned, I got my first sponsored episode in episode 151. So looking for more of those opportunities. This won't change the quality of the podcast or affect it anyway. You might just hear a few thank yous and a blurb in the episode about the sponsor. And I've kind of made a loss the last 3.5 years, so I need to recoup some of that money back. And I feel like I put in some hard graft to get to there. Also excited to showcase my travels on video. So my YouTube channel, Roaming with Hamo, is a different angle of this podcast. If you're just interested in audio, great, stick around. But if you want to see what I get up to, and in terms of me trying to put some videos together, I quite enjoy it. They're on my Roaming with Hamo YouTube channel, and I've got one coming out every week at the minute. And ideas for the audio side, just be more live podcasts potentially. I might start doing that. I can press this live button on my hosting site. So if I give you a heads up, you can know what date I'm going to go live, and it's going to be pretty raw, no editing. And I'd maybe like to do more video episodes for this podcast in person, so you get an idea in terms of the vibe. So if I interview someone, the audio will still come out, but also might release that as a video on YouTube too. And maybe even put it on Spotify. We'll see how that goes. I need to look into that. And of course, more travels and more people to meet. So exciting times ahead. Going to wrap up the podcast there. So thanks for tuning in to 250 episodes, about 150 guests. It's been a bit of a journey, ups and downs, lessons learned, great times, great people. Pretty much loved every guest that's been on. And it's just exciting to think what's come up this year with the guests. So I'm really excited to release more content that way. Got some travels planned for the end of this year. And next year is a bit of a mystery so far. I think there could be a few things on the horizon for the podcast in terms of sponsored content, but also trips and traveling. Haven't planned it too much yet, but it could be an exciting year. So stick around. Tell your friends about the podcast if you want to share something that's cool, and get them in for the ride for the Winging It Travel podcast if they're interested in a couple of people talking about travel. And the most important thing for the podcast on Google is that it's rated. So 5 stars is obviously great. A nice little comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts about why you like the podcast is also good. And just get in contact. Any questions, anything you want to hear, any guests that should come on, let me know and I'll start working away at that. So yeah, lots more to come. Pretty excited about it. Here's to the next 250. Probably should narrow it down. Let's say next 100. And that goes into next year. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. Thanks for the reviews. Thanks for the follows. Thanks for the downloads. Thanks for sharing my podcast with your friends and your family. Keep doing that. Really appreciate it. And let's go and see the world some more this year, going into 2025. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast episode today. If you've been inspired by today's chat and want to book some travel, if you head to the show notes, you'll see some affiliate links below which help support this podcast. You'll find Skyscanner to book your flight. You'll find booking.com to book that accommodation. Want to stay in a super cool hostel? You'll see Hostelworld down there too. You'll find Revolut to get your travel card sorted. Click the GigSky link to get your eSIM ready for your trip. And more importantly, you'll find Safety Wing Insurance to get that travel insurance for your trip. There are many more to check out, so when you click that link and book your product, a small commission goes towards me and the Winging It Travel podcast. Thank you in advance and enjoy your travels.